or the other. You know who they are. So you know that you know who these candidates are. Who's this guy? What's his name? Does anybody know? Mitt Romney. Okay, he's a Republican who's from the George W. Bush, who's very popular here, and I know that he's from that particular party, but he is not as moderate politically as George W. Bush. In fact, he never really mentions George W. Bush in his campaign, which shows where the Republican Party is going further to the right. And of course, you know the President of the United States. The world was excited about Barack Obama, except Lithuania. No, never mind. Because of the shadow of Russia and other concerns. I'm joking. I'll tell you when my jokes come, and I'll put my hand up. Because sometimes they're embedded. And how many of you would like to go into public service? In other words, in government or politics, and willing to admit it in front of your friends? How many? Okay. How many of you would like to go into business? How many of you want to be unemployed? What are you going to do? Be philosophers or something? Go into academia? Take her place here at the institution? There's a lot of competition. Okay, I get a sense of the audience. I come from a university in Washington, D.C., where most of my students are interning in government, or they want to go into government, and many of them work in our U.S. Congress, and many work in the campaigns, and so I learned about campaigns not only from my research, but from my former students that are involved in this campaign. So some of my observations are from research, some of them are from we call it moles, like in the intelligence community, moles, somebody comes in and gets things and sends it out. My moles in all the campaigns. And so part of what we need to know about this campaign is who's going to win and who's going to lose. And it's been somewhat fluid in the last month with respect to that in the presidential election. But we also have elections to the House of Representatives. We have a Congress with a House and a Senate. The House of Representatives has 435 members and 100 senators. 1/3 of the U.S. Senate is up for re-election. They are up every 6 years. And whoever wins in the House and the Senate, the majority, will have an impact on the president. We don't have a parliamentary system, as you know. We have a system that separates power. And so the president has had real problems getting things done this last year and a half because the Republicans are the majority, the opposition party, in the House of Representatives, and they've really tried to stop things that he wanted to do. And for the first 2 years of his administration, we had unified party government, the same party in the House, the Senate, the presidency, the Democrats. I've written a book about this. It's called Obama in Office. And he did exceedingly well, but a lot of conservative Republicans didn't like it. There was a reaction to it, and they elected a majority, historic majority in the House of Representatives, and he's dealing with that. So we'll talk about that also. But very briefly, President Obama has people critical of him on the right and on the left. The right thinks he's too expansionistic. He's too active, he's too liberal. He's a socialist, and that's a bad word in the United States. It's not a bad word around the world, but it's a bad word in the United States. The left, pardon me, the liberals and the Democratic Party, you don't have to write this down, just listen to it. That's fine. The left think that they don't like the fact that he didn't shut down Guantanamo, that he is using too many missiles from Predator aircraft, shooting at terrorists in Pakistan because it's killing men and women, and that he didn't do enough in terms of health care. He didn't do enough in a variety of other issues. So he's being criticized on the left also. Others say that he's too deliberative. I call him the professorial president, and that's not a compliment. He's too much like a professor. He likes to analyze things. In the United States, when you campaign, you have to keep things simple. But when you govern sometimes and you try to persuade things to the American people, you've got to keep it simple also. You have to have a clear strategy, theme, and message of governing, and he's missed that, some people think. And the most important thing in any election in the world are jobs. And that's true in the United States. The economy, it has an 8.1% unemployment rate. That's pretty good compared to some places in the world, but it's an issue in this campaign. It's the economy. Bill Clinton used to say, it's the economy, stupid. Ronald Reagan said, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? This election is about Mitt Romney in a retrospective way, saying, okay, he inherited a bad economy, but is it really getting that much better? And I can do a better job. The president is doing a prospective narrative and saying, it will be better. I pulled you out of a very bad time. Maybe we're not creating enough jobs, but give me 4 more years. That's what the election is about, to a great extent. But it's changed as a result of problems. Problems being Mitt Romney had to move ideologically further to the right, to the base of the Republican Party, way far to the right, compared to where the American voter is. He selected as his vice presidential candidate a person very conservative to the right, to appeal to the right base of his party. It was a brutal nomination battle. In the United States, we have primaries and caucuses that go on for months, spending hundreds of millions of dollars beating up on each other, and he was really injured along the way. And then he could not really brag about the fact that he's a businessman, because he was the head of a thing called Bain Capital, which was a leveraged takeover outfit. It wasn't a factory or something where you create jobs. It was, you move in, you buy a company, you fire people, and you make it more efficient, and you keep going ahead. And he made millions that way, hundreds of millions of dollars. And it wasn't a job creator. So the president, for several months now, has accused him of not being sensitive to the middle class in America, accusing him of being a capitalist that pays very low tax rates. And he's unwilling to tell everybody what the tax rate was for the last 5 years. It just came out for 1 year. Most Americans pay about 30% tax. Income tax, they have property tax too, and other things. He paid 14% tax, 14.1% tax, and that became an issue. His governorship, he was governor of the People's Republic of Massachusetts. Now, you don't understand how I'm being ironical right now, but the People's Republic of Massachusetts means it's very liberal. And he wants to not be perceived as very liberal. And so he can't really brag about the fact that he was governor of Massachusetts, which is a very liberal place, one of the most liberal states. He has enormous wealth. And it's hard for him to sell to the American people that he's part, that I care about the middle class, I'm part of the middle class, which is part of the narrative that you need to have in the United States. If you look at recent issues, you'll see that candidates have to have message discipline. You run for a campaign. How many of you want to run for public office someday and are willing to admit in front of your friends? Okay, there's a Bill Clinton back there. He did when he was very young. He wanted to run. Well, when you run for election, I run a campaign management school, have for 30 years. You have to keep your message discipline simple. You've got a clear strategy, theme, and message linked to appropriate tactics, okay? Campaigns are wars. and you use social media, you use get out the vote, ground operations, you use television, but you have to have discipline. Mitt Romney has turned out doesn't have a lot of discipline. His anti-Obama campaign on the economy hasn't worked, so he switched to other issues. But the 47% mistake that occurred a long time ago, but the film came out about it, was very important. What's that about? In a private setting where it was secretly recorded by somebody, he said that, well, 47% of the American people who will vote for the president are basically beholding to the government for entitlement programs. In other words, money from the government. That they're not hardworking. That came out in the press. It hurt him in the polls. In fact, the 47% that pay no taxes in the United States, 1/3 of them are people like Mitt Romney, who use the tax code to make sure they don't pay taxes. Another third are like my mother. She's 99, sharp as a tack, very healthy, but she doesn't have an income. She doesn't pay taxes. So he alienated the retirees, and you can't do that in our election to win, and that's a major problem. But the major issues of this campaign are unemployment, slow GDP growth, healthcare reform, which he pushed through, these huge deficits in debt. We have a debt of $16 trillion. $16 trillion, okay? It's a major problem. If you look at the budget of the United States, we bring in enough money from taxes to pay for Social Security, which is retirement, Medicare, which is health insurance for the aged, Medicaid, health insurance for the poor, payment on net interest that we pay on the debt, and then retirement for the veterans, the military people, and public service people. And we borrow the rest. If we borrow for the war, we borrow for the military, we borrow for education, we borrow for the rest. So as I was saying a little while ago, this is strange because we have a treaty where we say we're going to protect Taiwan, right, against China. Well, if we protect Taiwan against China, and China sort of threatens Taiwan, we'll have to borrow money from China to fight China. Good, you got one joke. This is a tough crowd. And so, yeah, debt and deficit is a major issue in this campaign. Immigration, we have 21 million people in the United States that are illegal immigrants out of 331 million. Many of them are from Mexico. This is a major issue. And we're building a wall. You know, walls work really well, like in Berlin, in China, and you know, the Chinese wall, they work really well. Well, we're building a wall to keep immigrants out of the illegal immigrants out of the United States. Republicans are very tough on that. Democrats, you know, they want to have security, but they also want to have a pathway to citizenship where people who are educated, don't break the law, who are contributing to society, who learn our civic culture, can become citizens. That's an issue. Size of government is an issue. What's that all about? It's a philosophical argument that is around all the time, and it's really important in this election, is how large should government be? There are libertarians who say we need to shrink government. Republicans, we need to shrink government because it takes freedom away from people. And freedom is very important. Every regime in the world balances freedom versus order. You know that very well here from the experience of this country with the Soviet Union. China knows it now. They say we need to have more order. We need to throw people in jail and limit access to the internet. As we grow economically, we'll have freedom maybe later. In the United States, there's a debate over freedom versus order, or size of government, and it is ideological. Ideology doesn't solve problems, in my opinion. Oh, by the way, I'm not a spokesperson for the U.S. government. I embarrass the U.S. government. I criticize the U.S. government, and so they'll just have to deal with it later on. If there's somebody from the media, I speak for myself, okay? Let's keep going. Then there are social issues in this campaign like pro-life, pro-choice, abortion rights for women, guns. We love our guns in the United States. Everybody wants to have a gun in the back of their pickup and roll around. And no limits on guns. Democrats want to limit guns. And foreign policy. Yes, you would think that foreign policy was very important. I know you do because you're here. You have some threat from other nations, another nation. And you say, well, why isn't that at the center of American politics? It isn't. It's about jobs. Tragically, we have an ambassador killed by terrorists in Benghazi, but it is important indeed, but it is not in this election. The Middle East is not in this election. Afghanistan is not in this election. Relationships with nations in Central Europe are not in this election. It's about jobs. So therefore, if there is an issue related to jobs like trade, it becomes part of the election, like in places like Ohio, which is very important in the electoral college. I'll explain that in a second. To win, and they have a lot of automobile manufacturers, and China is flooding the United States with cheap, subsidized auto parts. Then the president will stand up to China, as he did last week, and say, we're going to the World Trade Organization to protest the fact that they're doing this and doing it unfairly. And that will help him get jobs in Ohio. Why? And other states that produce automobiles like Michigan, etc., because it's about jobs. So I'm going on too long. Let me just say that these are available to all the students later on. All these slides, and they back up some of what I'm saying. This campaign is also about strategy and about money. We've got an ungodly amount of money flowing into these campaigns legally as a result of recent Supreme Court cases. We have things called super PACs, political action committees. This campaign will probably be a $6 billion, wake up in the back row, $1 billion campaign. Last time it was $4.5 billion. That's for the House and the Senate, primary and general elections, general elections. It's an ungodly amount. Much of it goes to the air war. What's the air war? Air war is television. Just blitzing TV ads in the battleground states. So what are the battleground states? Just an aside. We have an electoral college in the United States. You can't go to that college where you get a sweatshirt and stuff. It is something in the Constitution that says that each state has in the Electoral College the equivalent of the number of members of the House of Representatives and the senators. California, they have 53 members of the House and 2 senators, that's 55 votes. They have 55 votes if they go for one candidate or the other. Okay, so it's winner take all. So let's say Obama wins by 1 vote in California, he gets 55 Electoral College votes. Bear with me now. You win by 270 Electoral College votes. And the money is being spent in 7 states, 7 or 8 states now, because these are states that are too close to call. And you go into this Electoral College battle, you go into this battle, this was 2008. Red states are Republicans, blue states are Democrats. You go into this battle with the following situation. You go into the battle with the president, Democrats having 237 electoral college votes. You add up all these states, it's 237, solid, okay? And the Republicans have 206. So you win with 270. These are the toss-up states. This is where the campaign is in America right now. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent in these states to get these electoral college votes. The president goes into it ahead of the Republicans always. I was in Sweden before the last election, just before 2008, and I was sitting at a forum, and a bunch of students, there were about 800 in this auditorium. First question was, well, why is it blue up here and here and on the edges of America? And the ambassador who was appointed by George Bush, I know you love George Bush, but you got to have some George Bush jokes. I said, he said, why are they blue there? And I said, that's where all the smart people live. Anyway, you asshole. And he lasted 2 more years. So the point is, this election is about, well, it's about these yellow states, okay? And it's about these states here. There's no way that a Republican has never won since Abraham Lincoln. How many of you have heard of Abraham Lincoln? Smart group. Since Abraham Lincoln, no one's won without Ohio. And Mitt Romney is behind in Ohio right now. Ohio has a big automobile industry, and he's gone into the state criticizing the present automobile industry and bailing out the automobile industry. That is not a good strategy, let me tell you. And the president spent twice as much money in that through his campaign on TV ads, hammering Mitt Romney. Plus, Mitt Romney has this little problem with 47%. There's a little problem of message discipline, and he keeps getting in trouble. It's not over yet, but I would say that, as you know from the internet, because if you want to, you can find all this stuff out on the internet, that Barack Obama is going to be the next president of the United States. That it's not going to be Mitt Romney. Now, a fact. Only 8% of the American people now have not made up their mind about who they're going to vote for. 8%. So I say we're going to spend billions in this campaign, and hundreds of millions for the last 40 days. I say write $100,000 checks and hand them out to the undecided voters in the battleground states. It's probably a better way to run the election. Go. Now you know about Florida, and you know in 2000 the election was so close with Gore that it went to the Supreme Court of the United States to determine the outcome of the election, and the Supreme Court voted 5-4, and the president was elected. Florida, Barack Obama could lose Florida this time and still win, but Florida has a very high percentage of Latinos, and non-Cuban Latinos, the Cubans vote Republican, and they're likely to surge, and the latest polls show that he's doing pretty well in Florida. High percentage, 30% of Nevada are Latinos. It's a battleground state, too close to call. It's sort of surging for the president also. Colorado, it is 16% Latinos, and they're surging towards the president also. So all of the models that predict what's happening now take into account performance of the economy, number of Democrats, Republicans, the popularity of the president, and then sometimes they throw in whether there is enthusiasm among Latinos in these states. Virginia is another one. So the president's likely to get reelected. Foreign policy is not an issue in this thing, although you're studying foreign policy. It can be at any point in time, though. You saw what happened in 9/11. If we're threatened, there's rally effects around the president, and there's support for the incumbent president. And so if something happens with Iran, God forbid, there would be rally effects around this president who would help him in the election. Now let's go to the Senate. Let's stop. These are in-depth analysis of all the battleground states. The weirdos in here that really want to see more about what's happening. America is this. Most voters in America are in the bell-shaped curve. We're in the middle. We're radical centrists. We're not far left. We're not far right. We're not commies like in Berkeley, California, you know, liberals, or not Aryan nation types over here in upstate Idaho, where it's very conservative. There's not a lot of Tea Party people. And this distribution here shows you what we are electing in the House and the Senate. We're electing people in the primaries, not the general election, because most districts are safe in the House of Representatives. Safer than the Politburo in Havana. Never mind. Tough group. But it's in another language, I understand. So we get this distribution of ideology in the House and the Senate. Democrats, Republicans, the president says he wants to come together and work with people in the middle. There's nobody in the middle anymore. It's very hard. So after the election, you're likely to have deadlock. This is an actual distribution of votes. Pardon me, the quantitative types will love it. These are observations of votes. These are Democrats in the House and Senate. These are Republicans in the House and the Senate. These names are names of people who are on a special group called the Super Committee to deal with debt and deficit. Forget about that. The point is that there's nobody in the middle that overlaps anymore. When I first worked in the U.S. Senate, a long time ago, in the 70s, 1/3 of the House and the Senate crossed over and were moderates. They had to work with each other. That has totally changed. We have deadlock. We will have deadlock, gridlock, ideological gridlock after this election, no matter who's elected. Even if Mitt Romney is elected and we have a unified party government, it's going to be very hard for him to build a coalition with people over on the Democratic side. So the future is not great. So when I write about this, I get so depressed, I use pharmaceuticals. And my pharmaceutical choice is gin. It works pretty well. Yet it's sort of reflected in how I write sometimes, so I'm a bit careful. So in conclusion, let me say that America is having a very important election. All elections have consequences for governing, and we will have consequences for the lame duck session. What's that? That's after an election, the Congress comes back, and they know who was elected, but they're still in power until the next year. It's lame duck, you know, a crippled duck. And so they're going to have a lot of issues in the lame duck session. And that's when the New START treaty passed. I think the lame duck session, you know about New START probably. The treaty with Russia over nuclear weapons. That's when it passed. All of these things are theoretically going to happen in the lame duck. I don't think so. They can't agree now with this distribution of ideology. We're going to have deadlock. You're going to see lots of things written about on the internet about sequestration, fancy word for cuts. Cuts in military, cuts in domestic to get the $1.2 billion in the next decade. Trillion, that's wrong, $1 trillion. That's trillion, sorry, typo of mine. $1 trillion cut in the next decade, which we need to begin to do. That's the agreement in a general law. They'll probably change it, and we'll have problems with debt and deficit, we'll have problems with tax reform, there's a multitude of other issues, plus the Middle East may blow up further. Certainly, Syria is not going to resolve itself. Afghanistan will still be an issue. And so they need to deal with this, even though it's not part of the election during this lame duck period. It's going to be very crowded, probably very little gets done. Now we go to 8 p.m. tonight, right, with this, so I can go on with my lecture for several more hours. Okay, well maybe not. So let's open it up to questions, comments about anything that I've said or haven't said. And how many of you do not, before you went to college, how many of you lived outside of Vilnius? So, okay, so most of you are from outside of this town. So I know you're having an election. The mayor has an interesting election going on with 2 bicycles. Right? I find that very, I'm taking pictures of the posters to take back to my campaign manager in the state. And so you may have questions about campaign strategy and tactics. Our social media is constantly morphing. It is morphing as we speak in terms of new things that are going on in the campaign. Just like a war, people are innovating in new tools all the time. So you may have some questions about that. But let's open it up for questions and comments. Can you